On the night everything changed, 13-year-old Kacie Woody was at home in her family's house in Holland, Arkansas. Her brother, Stephen, had gone to the college library to study, leaving Kacie alone. As usual, Kacie spent her evening chatting with her friends on Yahoo Messenger. The sounds of her typing and laughing usually filled the house. It was her normal nighttime routine. But when Stephen returned home at 10 p.m., something felt wrong the moment he walked through the front door. The house was too quiet. Not the usual silence of a sleeping house, but a heavy, unsettling quiet. He couldn't hear Kacie in the next room, and she didn't answer when he called out. Thinking she might have gone to bed early, Stephen checked her room, but she wasn't there. He searched the entire house. Still no sign of her. Then he noticed something chilling. Kacie's computer was still on, but she was gone. Even more disturbing, her glasses were lying broken on the floor. One lens was missing. Before we continue, welcome to Crime Uncovered, where every case has a story, and the truth is often stranger and darker than fiction. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to hit that button to stay updated on the latest true crime cases we uncover. And to our returning subscribers, thank you for your continued support. Don't forget to like this video so it reaches more people who care about the truth behind the headlines. I would love to know where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. So back to the case. As Steve was still trying to figure out what had happened, that's when the family dog limped in. But it wasn't running like usual, it was barely walking, as if it had been hurt. It moaned softly, as if trying to warn Stephen that something terrible had just happened. And deep down, Stephen already knew. He just didn't know how bad it truly was. What happened to Kacie while she was home alone? And who could have gotten past without anyone noticing? Stephen immediately called his father, Rick Woody, who was a police officer and working a night shift at the time. As soon as Rick heard that Kacie was missing, he raced home. A father's worst fear had just become real. Rick didn't waste a second. He alerted the local police, and soon officers, friends, and neighbors began arriving at the house. The small, peaceful town of Holland quickly transformed. A wave of urgency swept through the community as people brought flashlights, bundled up against the night air, and split into search groups. They combed nearby woods, fields, and neighborhood streets, calling Kacie's name. The shock of her sudden disappearance rippled through everyone. No one could understand how a bright, cheerful girl had vanished without a sound or clue. Meanwhile, police began examining the house. There was no sign of forced entry, no broken windows, no signs of a struggle, and nothing appeared stolen. But the front door had been left unlocked, an unsettling detail that added to the growing fear. Then, investigators discovered something chilling. A single wet footprint on the garage floor. It didn't match any of the family members. That meant someone had been inside. Someone uninvited. Someone who had likely taken Kacie. Officers seized the family's computers to dig into her online activity. Investigators hoped her chat logs would offer some kind of lead. And what they found painted a disturbing picture. Kacie had been speaking with people online her family didn't know, forming relationships in the digital shadows of internet chat rooms. It didn't take long to realize that one of those conversations may have turned deadly. Now, detectives faced a terrifying question. Who had Kacie been talking to? And could one of those seemingly harmless online friends be hiding something truly sinister? As investigators dove into Kacie's computer files, a troubling discovery surfaced. Among her online conversations, one name stood out: Scott. Kacie had been chatting almost daily with someone she believed was a 17-year-old boy from Atlanta, Georgia. According to the messages, they had met in a Christian chat room, a place meant to be safe and supportive. From their very first exchange, their bond had grown quickly. Scott seemed to understand Kacie in a way that few others did. He told her his life wasn't easy, that his mother had passed away, that his father was overly strict, and that he felt isolated and alone. These were the kinds of things Kacie could relate to deeply. She had experienced her own pain, especially the loss of her mother in a tragic car crash. Talking to Scott gave her comfort, as though she had finally found someone who truly saw her. Someone who didn't just listen, but understood the depth of her sorrow. She opened up to him in ways she hadn't with anyone else. Kacie shared her grief, her frustrations, and her hopes. Scott always knew the right words to say. He was funny, caring, and constantly reassured her. Whenever she felt down, he lifted her spirits. Over time, it felt like more than just a friendship. Felt real, like she had found a lifeline. But investigators didn't see a charming teenage boy. They saw red flags. Something in the tone of the messages, the timing, and the grooming language made detectives uneasy. It was all too polished, too practiced. So they dug deeper. Using digital tools, they traced the IP address attached to the messages Scott had sent, and the truth hit like a punch to the gut. Scott didn't exist. The person Kacie had been confiding in wasn't a teenager at all. He was a 47-year-old man named David Fuller, living across the country in California. For months, David had used a fake identity to win Kacie's trust. He carefully crafted his lies, pretending to be a kind-hearted, lonely teen who had experienced loss. All so he could get closer to her. What Kacie thought was an innocent online friendship was actually something far more sinister. She had been groomed, and the horror didn't stop there. Detectives soon discovered that David Fuller hadn't just been chatting online. He had recently traveled across multiple states, making his way east, just days before Kacie vanished. Now the question burned in everyone's mind. Had David already reached Arkansas? Had he met Kacie in person, and if so, was she still alive? Investigators dug into David Fuller's background, and what they found was chilling. David wasn't just a man pretending to be a teenager. He was a former security guard with a criminal history and a disturbing online presence. His record showed signs of past harassment and predatory behavior, and police began to piece together the terrifying reality. David had carefully planned this. He had rented a minivan in California and made the long drive to Arkansas. Surveillance footage confirmed he had arrived in Conway, just days before Kacie went missing. He had even stayed in a local motel, not far from her home. Detectives also found out that David had been using multiple fake identities online, including the 17-year-old Scott and an older Uncle Matt, claiming to be Scott's adult relative. He had used these different personas to manipulate not just Kacie, but her father as well. He'd even called Kacie's home, pretending to be Uncle Matt to earn her family's trust. Kacie, who was just 13 and still grieving her mother, had been targeted by a man who knew exactly how to exploit vulnerability. She thought she was talking to a kind boy her age. In reality, she had been lured by a predator who had already crossed state lines to reach her. Worse still, the minivan David had rented was now missing, and so was he. Where had David Fuller taken Kacie, and would police find them before it was too late? Now that David Fuller was confirmed as the main suspect, the search turned into a full-blown manhunt. Authorities knew they were racing against time. Every hour that passed could mean the difference between life and death. The FBI, local police, and cybercrime experts all joined the effort. They followed every lead, knowing that a young girl's life was on the line. Investigators tracked David's movements using his phone records and online activity. Their search led them to a storage unit in Cabot, Arkansas, around an hour's drive from Greenbrier. The unit had been rented under David's name, and the timing matched perfectly with when he arrived in the area. The team rushed to the scene, knowing this might be their only chance to find Kacie. It was December 4th, 2 days since Kacie had vanished. Police surrounded the storage facility, weapons ready. The tension was unbearable. Everyone held their breath, unsure of what they were about to uncover behind the locked door. When they opened the unit, they were met with a nightmare. Inside was the rented minivan, and in the back they found Kacie Woody. She had been bound and gagged. It was clear she had suffered. Her young life had been stolen in the most horrific way imaginable. Also inside the unit was David Fuller. He was dead, killed by his own hand. After murdering Kacie, he had shot himself. The man who had hunted a child across state lines had taken the coward's way out. The news crushed the community. Kacie, a bright and loving 13-year-old girl who wanted to care for animals and had dreams of being a veterinarian, was gone. Her father, her friends, her town. None of them would ever be the same again. But the horror didn't end there. What else would the investigation reveal? And had the signs been there all along? As investigators combed through the evidence left behind by David Fuller, a horrifying truth began to take shape. Every piece, his laptop, his phone, storage receipts, and notes, revealed how carefully and deliberately he had planned Kacie's abduction and murder. He hadn't just stumbled into this crime. He had spent months preparing for it. David had been using multiple fake identities online. While Dave Fagan was the one Kacie had known best, investigators discovered he had created at least 4 other personas, including girls and boys around Kacie's age, to gain the trust of young teens. He had saved conversations, photos, and even had detailed notes about several girls he had been chatting with. Kacie was not his only target. He had tracked her routine, knew when her father would be at work, and picked a time when she was most vulnerable. He had bought the duct tape, ropes, and gag found at the crime scene well before arriving in Arkansas. Police believed he had watched her house the day before the kidnapping and had used the heavy rain that night as cover to sneak in through a partially unlocked window. In his vehicle, investigators found a terrifying kit: a backpack filled with restraints, adult diapers, sleeping pills, a camera, and other disturbing tools, all pointing to the possibility that he had planned to keep Kacie alive for longer before killing her. But perhaps something didn't go according to plan. Even more chilling was the fact that David had been married and had a teenage daughter, both of whom knew nothing about his double life. His wife described him as a quiet, normal man who worked a boring office job. The truth shattered her world. David had been living a lie, using work trips as cover to meet and stalk young girls. He had rented the storage unit weeks in advance. This was no spur-of-the-moment act. This wasn't just the story of a kidnapping gone wrong. It was the story of a predator who hunted online, learned the language of teenagers, and used it to trap and destroy. Could this tragedy have been stopped before it ever happened? And what warning signs did everyone miss? In the painful aftermath, Kacie's friends, family, and community began replaying every moment, searching for signs they might have missed. The truth was difficult to face. There were red flags, but no one had realized how serious they were. Kacie's friends remembered how obsessed she'd become with her cool, online friend Dave. He always seemed to say the right things, always understood her. To them, it just seemed like an innocent teenage crush, until they learned Dave was actually a 47-year-old predator. Her dad, Rick, had trusted her judgment. He knew she was smart and believed she would tell him if something wasn't right. But Kacie had hidden the real Dave from him, especially once the lies started. She never told her dad Dave was older, or that she had begun talking to him on the phone. She protected her fantasy, unaware that it was leading her into danger. Even Kacie's friends at school had started to feel something was off. One recalled Kacie saying, "I want to meet Dave someday. He's so different from boys at school." But Dave had warned her not to talk about him too much. That was part of his manipulation. He isolated her without her realizing it. The school computer system showed no signs of suspicious activity, and Kacie mostly chatted with Dave on the family computer at night. It all seemed safe until it wasn't. David Fuller had used every trick in the book: grooming, deception, flattery, and fear to keep Kacie close and her loved ones away. There were even missed opportunities in the investigation. When Rick contacted police the night Kacie went missing, some officers initially treated it like a runaway case. They had no way of knowing that every hour counted, and by the time the urgency set in, it was already too late. In hindsight, the warning signs were there, but David Fuller had camouflaged himself so well behind the screen that no one imagined such a tragedy could happen. But what would Kacie's story mean for the future of internet safety? And how could her legacy protect others? After Kacie's murder, the Woody family was left shattered, but they were determined her death would not be in vain. Her father, Rick Woody, made a choice, a painful but powerful one. He turned his grief into a mission to protect other children from the same fate. He began speaking out publicly, sharing Kacie's story at schools, community centers, and law enforcement conferences. Rick warned about the dangers of online predators, showing just how easily they could infiltrate a child's life under the guise of friendship. He was no longer just Kacie's dad. He became a voice for internet safety. The tragedy sparked a wave of change. Law enforcement agencies started taking online grooming more seriously. Schools introduced new internet safety programs. Parents began asking questions, checking their children's devices, and paying closer attention to who they were talking to. And in the heart of Greenbrier, the town came together to build something lasting: the Kacie Woody Foundation. The foundation worked to educate families and children, not by scaring them, but by empowering them. It taught that predators like David Fuller didn't always look dangerous. They could sound kind, patient, and even loving. But behind the screen, their intentions were often sinister. Kacie's story was used as a real, painful example of how quickly things can spiral when trust is misplaced online. For Rick, the pain never disappeared. He still missed her laugh, her music, and the way she called him Daddy. Every Christmas, every birthday, came with a hole in his heart. But knowing that Kacie's story was saving lives gave him strength. In the years since Kacie's death, countless parents have credited her story with opening their eyes, with preventing them from losing their own children. Even students, once careless with who they talked to online, began thinking twice. What happened to Kacie Woody was unspeakable. But because of her, a silent danger was dragged into the light. She became more than a victim. She became a warning, a lesson, and a legacy. And perhaps that's the most powerful justice of all, when one innocent life gone too soon protects thousands more. Thank you for watching. Every victim deserves their story told. If you found this story shocking and heartbreaking, subscribe to Crime Uncovered and help keep their memory alive. What do you think about this case? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Until next time, keep questioning everything.